The story takes place in 2012, where officers separately interview Marty and Cohle, asking them about an unsolved case from 17 years ago. The timeline then shifts back 17 years, when Marty and Cohle were members of the Criminal Investigation Unit. Just recently paired up as partners, the police discovered an eerily positioned female corpse beneath an old tree. She was completely naked, with her hands tied and her eyes covered. The body was found in a kneeling position, with multiple stab wounds to the abdomen and a spiral mark on her back. Most strikingly, a crown of deer antlers was placed on her head. Around the body were several spiral structures made of wicker. Cohle believed it was some kind of religious sacrifice, and such a meticulously staged scene suggested that the killer had done this before. He also noticed that the woman had herpes on her lips and receding gums, speculating that she might have been a prostitute. The next day, the fingerprint results identified the woman as Dora, aged 28, who indeed had worked as a prostitute. She had been detained before for carrying contraband. Dora's ex-husband was named Charlie. Charlie had previously served time in prison for check fraud, and after his release, Dora divorced him. The autopsy revealed that Dora had been sexually assaulted before her death, and her body tested positive for a virus and hallucinogens. The cause of death was strangulation, but no fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Dora's death quickly made the headlines in all the local newspapers. The leadership pressured Marty and Cohle to solve the case quickly. The two then visited a nearby village to investigate. They accidentally learned from an old man that a 10-year-old girl named Marie had gone missing from the village 5 years earlier. The two then visited a nearby church to inquire about Marie. The pastor told them that Marie's parents had moved away 4 or 5 years ago. Cohle showed the strange structures from the crime scene to the pastor. The pastor said it resembled a religious symbol known as a devil's net, but he didn't know which religion it was associated with. The two then went to the local police station in the village, where they found a file on Marie. Marie's mother had reported her missing to the police, but the file showed that the report had been marked as an error. Chief Steve explained that the officer who handled Marie's missing case at the time did so because Marie's parents were divorced and neither cared much for Marie, so the officer closed the case. There was another girl named Lena who went missing with Marie back then, but Lena returned the next day. The little girl said that a monster with green ears tried to drag her into the woods, but she escaped when the monster left. The police drew a sketch of the monster based on Lena's description, which left Marty and Cohle puzzled. They later questioned Dora's ex-husband Charlie, who claimed that the last time he spoke to Dora was a few months ago. Dora had told him she was going to a church to become a nun, and that she had met a king there. Marty and Cohle were also puzzled by Charlie's account. Back at the police station, the captain introduced Cohle and Marty to a pastor named Lee, who was also the head of a charity organization. Lee's cousin was the governor of Louisiana, and he was very concerned about Dora's case, urging Cohle and Marty to solve it quickly. Before leaving, the captain gave Cohle an ultimatum: if they didn't solve the case soon, additional personnel would be brought in to form a special task force, and Dora's case would be handed over to them. Cole's intuition told him that Marie's disappearance and Dora's death were somehow connected. The two then visited Marie's uncle and aunt. The aunt claimed they had no idea where Marie was. However, Cohle discovered an identical devil's net in the aunt's barn, just like the one at Dora's crime scene. This discovery further convinced Cohle that the two cases were linked, so they took the structure with them. Cohle and Marty then visited Dora's mother, who said that Dora didn't have many friends. The last time she spoke to Dora was a month ago, and Dora had mentioned that she often visited a church, but the mother didn't know which church it was. The two continued to interview Dora's friends, who also mentioned that Dora liked to go to church but never specified its location. A friend also mentioned that a year ago, Dora had worked as a prostitute near Spanish Lake for a while. The two soon went to Spanish Lake, where a girl told them that Dora had joined a church after quitting her job. She had left in such a hurry that she forgot her bag and never came back for it. Cohle found a diary in Dora's bag, and on the first page was a very strange sentence: "I close my eyes and see the king in yellow moving through the trees." That statement corresponded exactly to what Dora's ex-husband Charlie had mentioned. Cohle saw in the diary that the king was named Kakusha, and there was also a recruitment flyer for a church inside. The next day, Cohle returned to Marie's village for more investigation, taking a photo of one of the residents' houses, but he didn't find any valuable leads. Back at the station, special task force personnel were sent to take over Cohle and Marty's work. After Marty's plea, the leadership decided to give them 2 more weeks. The following day, they followed the recruitment flyer from Dora's diary and found the church Dora had attended. However, by then, the church had been reduced to ruins. Cohle discovered a painting on the wall that depicted a figure similar to Dora's body, complete with a crown of antlers. Afterward, they found a temporary church nearby, The pastor told them that the original church had burned down, leaving only the ruins to ensure the continuation of their ministry. They had built this temporary church. The pastor mentioned that he worked under Pastor Lee. This Lee was the same pastor Cole and Marty had met at the police station earlier. Lee was responsible for several charity projects and had funded the establishment of several religious schools and churches. Joel frequently visited the schools founded by Lee to preach. Marty asked who had painted the picture on the wall, and Joel suggested it might have been the work of Christian children. Later, Marty learned from two female congregants that they had seen Dora leaving the church with a tall, strong man. The man had scars on his face, possibly from burns, but they didn't know his name. This lead from the church went cold again. Cole believed that there must have been other victims like Dora in the past 5 years. The next day, back at the station, Cole scoured the entire records room. He finally found a case that bore a striking resemblance to Dora's. The victim was a 22-year-old woman named Rianne. Her body was found in a river 4 years ago, with ligature marks on her wrists and ankles and multiple stab wounds to her abdomen. The same virus and hallucinogens were found in her body. Most importantly, a spiral mark was discovered on her back. The police's closed case report stated that Rianne had accidentally drowned while high on drugs. Cole and Marty then visited Rianne's grandfather, who told them that Rianne had been dating a boyfriend before she died. The grandfather gave Cole a photo album that Rianne had left behind. Cole discovered that Rianne had attended a school called Light of the Way, which had been funded by Lee. The two immediately visited the school and found it had been closed down. On the campus, a groundskeeper was working, but he said he had only recently been hired to do the groundskeeping and knew nothing about the school. Meanwhile, Marty received a message from a colleague, informing him that Rianne's boyfriend, Reggie, had been imprisoned 6 months ago for manufacturing meth and rape. However, Reggie had escaped during parole 2 months earlier. More importantly, Reggie had connections with Dora's ex-husband Charlie while he was in prison. Cole immediately ordered an all-points bulletin for Reggie. Back at the station, the two arrested Charlie right away. At first, Charlie adamantly denied any involvement in Dora's death. Under Cole's pressure, Charlie admitted that he had shown Dora's photo to Reggie while in prison. When Cole asked what Reggie had talked about in prison, Charlie said Reggie mentioned getting out to perform some sort of religious activity with wealthy people. This religion involved using women and children as sacrifices. There was an ancient stone town in the woods where these rituals took place. Charlie also mentioned that Reggie had a spiral mark on his back, which was the symbol of their religion. Before leaving, Charlie told them that a man named Tyrone might know Reggie's whereabouts. The two then visited Tyrone's mother, who told them she hadn't seen her son Tyrone in 6 months, but she gave them Tyrone's girlfriend's address. Marty then tailed Tyrone's girlfriend. He found Tyrone at a bar. Tyrone told Marty that Reggie was now making meth for a motorcycle club. Cole had previously dealt with this club during his undercover days. He decided to go undercover again to find Reggie, this time posing as a drug-dealing addict. To dispel any doubts the gang might have, he deliberately injected himself with a syringe, and he also stole a bag of cocaine from the police evidence room. The next day, Cole took the cocaine to the motorcycle gang's hideout. Before leaving, he gave Marty a phone, saying he would call Marty to make the arrest if the undercover operation went smoothly. Soon, Cole met Ginger, the third in command of the motorcycle club. To test Cole, Ginger made him snort some cocaine. Cole then showed Ginger his stash, and after sampling it, Ginger confirmed that it was indeed pure, but Ginger told Cole that the club wasn't short on supply. They had someone who made their own cocaine, and that person was Reggie. Ginger then took Cole to a private location by boat. Ginger proposed that if Cole helped him with a task that night, he would introduce him to Reggie. Cole agreed, and the group then disguised themselves as police officers and headed to raid some petty criminals' home. Once inside, the group quickly subdued the small-time criminals, and Ginger began stuffing the house's stash of cocaine into a bag. When one of Ginger's men shot and killed one of the criminals, Cole immediately turned on Ginger and his crew. During the chaos, Cole managed to call Marty, asking him to come pick them up. Shortly after, Marty arrived in a car and picked up both Cole and Ginger. The next day, Ginger arranged for Reggie's cousin, DeWall, to meet them. DeWall seemed to realize that Ginger was being coerced by Cole and immediately refused Cole's offer to cooperate or take him to see his cousin, Reggie. After that, Cole and Marty began tailing DeWall. Marty followed him to a secluded riverbank but eventually lost him. They found DeWall's car parked by the river and pushed through a nearby fence, starting their trek deeper into the woods. Along the way, they discovered hidden explosives and frequent devil's net structures, confirming that the Ledoux brothers were nearby. Finally, after crossing a small creek, they stumbled upon the Ledoux brothers' meth lab. Cohle instructed Marty to go back and call for backup. But Marty, fearing they might tip off the brothers, insisted they move in immediately. They caught Reggie off guard and subdued him. Marty then entered another room. Just as DeWall emerged from the meth lab, Cohle trained his gun on him, but when Marty stepped out of the room, he immediately shot Reggie in the head. It turned out that Marty had discovered two emaciated girls imprisoned inside the room. Seeing this, DeWall attempted to flee but accidentally stepped on one of his own landmines, blowing himself to pieces. The two girls were rescued, and Cohle and Marty were hailed as heroes in the Louisiana State Police. However, during this time, Marty's wife left him, having discovered that Marty had spent the night at a female colleague's house after getting drunk during the investigation. Time quickly passed, and 7 years later, in 2002, Cohle, known for his excellent interrogation skills, was invited by another police department to question a drug dealer named Leonard. Using his persuasive skills, Cohle quickly got Leonard to confess, but Leonard proposed a deal, offering Cohle a shocking secret in exchange for immunity. Cohle, of course, refused to make any deals with a drug dealer, but Leonard's next words instantly enraged him. "I can tell you about the Yellow King," Leonard said, provoking Cohle to attack him. Officers rushed in to pull Cohle away, and it was then that Cohle realized the real killer behind the serial murders had never been caught. Leonard also mentioned that the true killer was being protected by a high-ranking official. Returning to Louisiana, Cohle told Marty that the serial killer from 7 years ago was still at large and that Reggie was just one member of a larger murder ring. Marty disagreed, arguing that if the killer was still out there, they would have committed more murders in the last 7 years. But no similar cases had surfaced. To convince Marty, Cohle took him to the jail to find Leonard. However, when they arrived, Leonard was already dead in his cell. A review of the surveillance footage showed that Leonard had received a call from his lawyer 3 hours earlier. Afterward, he was escorted back to his cell, and shortly thereafter, blood began to pour from the cell. Cohle immediately checked the call records, and an investigation revealed that the call had been made from a public phone in a remote location, highly unusual for a legitimate lawyer. Cohle suspected that Leonard had been threatened, but Marty still believed Cohle was overreacting and refused to continue investigating with him. Cohle was left to investigate alone. The next day, Cohle returned to the Light of the Way school, where he discovered numerous devil's net structures in an abandoned classroom. This only deepened his suspicion that the school was somehow connected to the serial murders. The following day, Cohle sought out Pastor Joel for questioning. 7 years earlier, Cohle had questioned Joel during the Dora investigation. Joel had mentioned that he helped Pastor Lee with missionary work at the school, but now Joel had quit that job. The reason, he revealed, was that he had discovered a dark secret at the school years ago. One day, while cleaning a senior pastor's office at the school, Joel accidentally knocked over a book, and inside, he found numerous photos of naked children. They were lying there neatly, and it was unclear whether they were unconscious or simply asleep. These children were all students at the school. Joel immediately reported this to the school's founder, Pastor Lee. Lee was very angry when he saw the photos, thinking that Joel had taken them. Despite Joel's desperate attempts to explain, he couldn't fully dispel the suspicion, and he was eventually forced to resign from his position. Lee promised to investigate the matter thoroughly, but in the end, nothing came of it. Later, Joel found out that the senior pastor had a special relationship with Lee. Joel also mentioned that in 1988, Lee founded a school called Shepherd's House. In 1990, the school was accused of having pastors who sexually assaulted students, leading to its closure. In 1992, Lee established Light of the Way School. Cohle then visited a children's rehabilitation center to question a little girl. This little girl was one of the children he and Marty had rescued from Reggie. The girl also attended Light of the Way School, and although she had been rescued, her mental state had not improved in the 7 years since. Cohle asked her if she had seen any other bad people besides the Ledoux brothers. As soon as she mentioned this person, the girl's emotions became highly agitated, further convincing Cohle that the real serial killer was still at large. The scarred man she described was likely the true culprit, and the two girls they interviewed at the church had also mentioned that Dora was taken away by a tall, strong man with scars on his face. Back at the station, Cohle requested to reopen the investigation into the serial murders from 7 years ago. The chief asked if he had any new evidence or new victims connected to the case. Cohle admitted that he didn't have direct evidence yet, but he boldly told the chief that there must be a powerful figure protecting the killer. He pointed out that when he and Marty first started investigating the case 7 years ago, higher-ups immediately wanted to hand the case over to a special task force, clearly indicating someone wanted to cover it up and keep the truth hidden. This powerful figure could very well be the mastermind behind the serial murders. The chief dismissed Cohle's claims as nonsense, insisting it was all in Cohle's imagination. Even his old partner, Marty, thought Cohle's ideas were far-fetched. As Cohle was leaving, the chief warned him to stop spreading baseless theories or he would be fired immediately. Afterward, Cohle confronted Lee, the founder of the school, asking for old records related to the school, including lists of principals, pastors, and students. Lee claimed that the charity school project had been shut down years ago, and many of the records were destroyed in a flood a few years back. Cohle then asked where the senior pastor, Austin, was now, to which Tuttle replied that Austin had died in a drunk driving accident a few years ago. Tuttle questioned why Cohle was asking about these things, and Cohle explained that he was investigating a serial murder case. However, Cohle left empty-handed, but when he returned to the station, he was suspended because Lee had called, accusing Cohle of baseless harassment. The station leadership preferred to believe a pastor over their own officer, and Cohle, fed up with working under such leadership, resigned in anger. That night, Maggie, while Marty was in the shower, snooped through his phone and discovered that he had been unfaithful again. This time, however, Maggie didn't confront him with anger. Instead, she calmly sat down and read a book in front of her husband. The next evening, in a bid for revenge, Maggie, tearfully holding a bottle of wine, went to Cohle's place. Eventually, Maggie made a move, and they ended up having an affair, effectively cuckolding Marty. Afterward, Maggie thanked Cohle for helping her out, making Cohle realize he had been used. The next night, Maggie told Marty, "I saw the videos on your phone. You did a good job filming them, but Cohle is 10 times better than you in every way." Enraged, Marty tried to strangle Maggie, but they ended up divorcing. The next day, when Cohle came to the station to finalize his resignation, Marty met him at the station's entrance, and they had a brutal fight, effectively becoming enemies for life. Not long after, Marty also quit his detective job. Up to this point, everything mentioned was part of the flashbacks narrated by Marty and Cohle during their interviews with the police officers. These events took place from 1995 to 2002. Now, let's fast forward to the present in 2012. The reason the officers were questioning Cohle at the station was that detectives Gilboa and Papania had encountered another eerie case. The victim was named Fanny, whose body was found near Lake Charles in 2010. The corpse was naked, suspended by dozens of ropes above Lake Charles, with a crown of antlers on her head, just like Dora's. 2 years had passed, and the case remained unsolved. The detectives believed there was a connection between this case and Dora's murder 17 years ago. So, they asked Cohle to recall the details of his investigation from back then. After reviewing the crime scene photos, Cohle agreed that Fanny's death was indeed the work of the real serial killer. When the detectives asked why the real killer wasn't caught back then, Cohle became visibly angry and stormed out. The detectives then turned to Marty for questioning. Marty claimed that after they took down Reggie, they believed the case was closed and didn't continue investigating with Cohle. As for what other clues Cohle might have uncovered, Marty said he had no idea. At this point, the detectives shifted their tone, revealing the real reason they were questioning Marty. They suspected that Cohle might be connected to the serial murders. Marty was stunned by this accusation. The detectives then asked Marty if it was true that when they were partners, Cohle took the lead in the investigation while Marty played a supporting role. Marty admitted that most of the leads that led them to capture Reggie were indeed discovered and reasoned out by Cohle. The detectives continued by asking if it was Cohle who suggested that the real serial killer hadn't been caught, to which Marty responded, "Yes." Then the detectives presented crime scene photos showing Cohle at the scene, which led them to suspect that Cohle might have been orchestrating the serial killings. Despite the fallout between Marty and Cohle over a woman, Marty still firmly believed that Cohle was a righteous cop. Marty then got up and left the station, telling the detectives not to come to him again about Cohle. Afterward, they questioned Maggie, who said that aside from his drinking habit, Cohle was nearly perfect in every other aspect. She also believed there was no way Cohle could be connected to a murderer. A week later, Marty was driving on the highway when he suddenly noticed someone tailing him. He pulled over, and to his surprise, it was Cohle, whom he hadn't seen in 10 years. They went to a bar, where Cohle got straight to the point, the serial killer from 17 years ago had started killing again, and it was time to finish the case. Marty thought Cohle was just drunk, pointing out that both of them had quit being detectives a decade ago. So how could they close the case? Cohle admitted that while he drank heavily, he was haunted by the fact that they never caught the real killer. After quitting the force, Cohle spent 8 years fishing and drinking beer in the countryside, until one day in 2010 when he saw the news about Fanny's murder on TV. This reignited his desire to solve the case. So, he returned to Louisiana, and over the past 2 years, he had gathered a significant amount of evidence. Now, he wanted Marty to partner with him again to catch the real killer. Marty thought Cohle was being delusional and told him that the police now suspected him of being the killer. Cohle explained that he had only been at the crime scenes to investigate, and then sarcastically added that modern cops spend more time creating suspects than actually finding killers. Despite Cole's sincere request for help, Marty coldly responded, "Why should I help you?" Marty got up to leave, but Cohle angrily called him a coward, saying that Marty owed this debt from 17 years ago and had an obligation to repay it. Cohle was referring to the day they captured Reggie, when Marty impulsively shot him dead. If Marty hadn't acted so rashly and instead brought Reggie back to the station, Cohle might have been able to interrogate him and uncover the true mastermind, possibly preventing further victims. Unable to resist Cole's provocation, Marty decided to join him in the investigation one more time. Cohle then took Marty to his secret storage unit, where he had collected a vast amount of evidence related to the serial killings. Over the past 2 years, Cohle discovered that Tuttle had established 14 schools throughout Louisiana. Starting in 1988, the disappearance rate within a 10-kilometer radius of these schools was twice that of other areas. What was even more chilling was that the known victims' women and children either attended a school funded by Lee or were members of a church under Lee's name. This included, but was not limited to, Marie and Lena, who went missing in 1990, Rianne, who was murdered in 1992, Dora, who was killed in 1995, the 2 girls rescued from Reggie's place, and Fanny, who was murdered in 2010. Aside from the 2 young girls who were assaulted by Reggie, it was highly likely that the other victims were murdered by the scarred man, and the powerful figure behind these crimes was likely Lee's cousin, Rev. Tuttle, the governor of Louisiana. This explained why, over the past 20 years, so many people had been brutally victimized while the perpetrators remained untouchable. Cohle sought Marty's help because Marty was well-connected, could find people in the police force to assist them, and had since established a private detective agency. Cohle wanted Marty to pull background information on Rev. Tuttle, Reggie, and others from the police, including their phone records and bank transactions, to find evidence of their group's crimes. Marty, still skeptical, thought Cohle was just drunk. As he hadn't seen any direct evidence implicating these people, he believed it was all just Cole's speculation. To gain Marty's trust, Cohle decided to reveal his trump card. He first showed a stack of photos, which depicted missing young girls being held captive. These photos were stolen from Lee's mansion. Cohle then played a videotape that showed a little girl being assaulted by a group of masked men, who later used her body in a ritual. That little girl was Marie, who went missing in 1990. After seeing this, Marty became very emotional and finally believed everything Cohle had told him. However, not long after Cohle stole this evidence from Lee's home, Lee mysteriously died at his residence. Marty suspected that Cohle might have killed Lee, but Cohle explained that Lee didn't report the theft because he had a guilty conscience. Furthermore, the police didn't make a big effort to investigate Lee's death, likely because someone powerful suppressed the case. The next day, Cohle hid all the evidence at Marty's company, fearing that the police might forcibly search his storage unit. Marty then went to the police station and brought a bottle of good liquor for the chief. The chief agreed to let Marty access the archives. Marty discovered that after DeWall was killed by the bomb, all his assets were transferred to his cousin's name. The two then found the cousin and questioned him. He claimed that since DeWall had no other relatives, the assets were transferred to him. However, he admitted that his relationship with DeWall wasn't great because DeWall often engaged in illegal activities. Cohle asked if he had ever seen a scarred friend hanging around with DeWall. The cousin confirmed that he had seen a scarred man with DeWall years ago but knew nothing more about him other than that he was slightly older than himself. They then visited a housemate whom Marty had found in the archives. This maid had worked for Sam Tuttle, Pastor Lee's father, for 19 years. Cohle asked her if she had ever seen a boy with a scarred face at Sam Tuttle's house. The maid mentioned that Sam Tuttle had a grandson with a scarred face, but she couldn't recall his name. Cohle then showed her the devil's net structure. The sight of the structure seemed to trigger old memories in the maid. causing her to become highly agitated and start muttering what sounded like religious incantations. At this point, the maid's granddaughter rushed in and chased Cohle and Marty out of the house, leaving the investigation at a dead end once again. They decided to revisit the clues from Marie's disappearance. In 1995, the police chief, Steve, had mentioned that Marie's case was handled by the sheriff. Marty found Steve and questioned him again about Marie's disappearance, but this time, Steve's story didn't match what he had said before. Clearly, Steve was lying. The next day, Cohle and Marty tricked Steve into meeting them in a remote area. They disarmed him and then forced him to watch the video of Marie being assaulted and murdered. The horrific content of the tape seemed to awaken Steve's conscience. Steve confessed that Marie had indeed been kidnapped, and the person responsible was a relative of the sheriff, which is why the report was falsified. Steve claimed that he hadn't just stood by or deliberately concealed the truth. He had been forced to cover it up because of pressure from higher-ups. To keep his job, he had to follow orders. Steve admitted that he didn't know where his relative was now. Cohle believed that this time Steve was telling the truth. Before leaving, they warned Steve not to report them. To reinforce the warning, Cohle had a sniper, who was a retired soldier and bar owner, shoot out Steve's car. This sniper had a daughter who disappeared from Lee's school in 1988 and was still missing, which is why he was willing to help Cohle. Back at their place, the case stalled once again. As they had no more information about the scarred man, Cohle suggested that maybe they needed to change their approach, a statement that seemed to spark Marty's realization. Why did Lena describe the monster as having green ears? Marty hypothesized that the killer might have been a painter who accidentally got green paint on his ears. Back in 1995, Cohle had taken a photo of a house in the village during his investigation. At the time, it was popular in the village to paint houses green. The two then found the owner of that house. The old lady told Marty that a big man with a scarred face had painted her house. She remembered him clearly because the scar was so prominent. The old lady mentioned that she had worked at the church, and the handyman who painted her house also did work for the church. Because of this connection, she paid him very little for his services. Cohle then asked for the name of the old lady's husband's company. Marty tracked down her husband's tax records and discovered that he had paid $265 for the painting job. The payment was made to a maintenance company owned by the Childress family, with Billy as the legal representative. He was the father of the scarred man. It turned out that Sam Tuttle had two sons, one named Lee and the other Billy. As the two sons grew up, they formed two separate families, the Tuttle family and the Childress family. The repair company owned by Billy had partnerships with the schools and churches established by Lee. This confirmed what the old lady had said, and it seemed that the scarred man came into contact with the victimized students while working at the school, finding opportunities to lure them into the woods to assault them. Cohle then asked Marty to find out the name of Billy's son. The next day, Cohle made over a dozen copies of the evidence they had gathered on the serial killings. He instructed the bar owner that if Cohle didn't call him within 24 hours, he should immediately send the evidence to various media outlets, newspapers, and police departments. Then the two drove to the scarred man Errol's residence. Upon arrival, Cohle noticed that the area around Errol's house was surrounded by dense woods. He instructed Marty to call the police, but there was no signal in the area, so they had to proceed on their own. Marty approached the door, pretending to ask to use the phone. Cohle stood guard nearby. Soon, a mentally unstable woman opened the door for Marty. The woman said there was no phone in the house. Marty asked if Billy was home. The woman confirmed that Billy was home but warned Marty to leave immediately. As she was about to close the door, a dog suddenly ran out and sprinted towards another building. Cohle immediately followed the dog but found its dead body behind the house. When he turned around, he saw Errol standing not far away. Errol then led Cohle into the woods. Meanwhile, Marty rushed into Errol's house and found the place filled with children's books and toys. The woman told Marty that her brother was a deranged killer and that he would die if he didn't leave. Marty then discovered an elderly man confined in another room. This man was Errol's father, Billy. Marty instantly realized that Cohle was in danger. Cohle had been led deep into the woods into a labyrinth by Errol, where he saw countless devil's nets and dried corpses along the way. This was where Marie and countless other victims had been tortured and killed. Soon, Cohle found himself in what seemed like a deep pit, and the eerie surroundings caused him to experience hallucinations. While Cohle was disoriented, Errol suddenly attacked. Despite intense pain, Cohle managed to strike Errol hard in the nose, causing Errol to drop him. A few seconds later, Errol raised his axe again to strike Cohle, but Marty arrived just in time and fired several shots at Errol, though he was also struck by a thrown axe. As Errol pulled out the axe to finish Marty off, Cohle managed to shoot and kill Errol in the nick of time. Shortly after, the The police arrived and surrounded the area. It turned out that Marty had forced the woman to call the police, who then fired several signal flares into the sky. The bright arc of the flare across the sky gave the two men hope of survival. Finally, after Marty's desperate cries for help, the two were found and rescued by the police. The police later unearthed dozens of skeletal remains around Errol's house. These were the bodies of people who had gone missing from the schools and churches. Under the cover of founding schools and churches, Lee had secretly established an organization. The Tuttle, Ladue, and Childress families were all members of this organization, which worshipped a deity known as Kakusha. In the end, at the place where Cohle and Marty fought their final battle with Errol, the truth of this dark conspiracy began to emerge. After a long coma, Cohle finally woke up, but when he saw the news reports, he firmly stated that there were still some killers who had escaped justice. Upon hearing this, Marty turned to leave, as he no longer wanted to continue this madness with Cohle. But Cohle had no intention of stopping there. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.